Check, check, mic check. Check, check, mic check. Welcome to Podcast Envy. I'm your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder, and today we're launching a brand new segment called Hey Andrea. This segment was initiated in my private Facebook group, The Creative Imposter, which I encourage you to go join if you want a little more creative encouragement, accountability, and flow in your life. Today, I am answering my first of, I'm sure, many podcast boss questions from listener Anna Joy Healing, who is getting ready to launch her brand new podcast called Queer Witch, all about the intersection of queerness, LGBTQ+, and magic, tarot, Reiki, herbs, astrology, etc. Sounds awesome. Anyway, rather than tell you about Anna's question, I'll let her share it with you herself.
Hey, my name is Anna Joy, and I just found your Podcast Envy podcast through your Creative Imposter podcast, and I'm really happy about both of them because I have just started doing the recordings for this podcast that I've been dreaming up for quite a few months now. I have the branding, I have the name picked out, I have some really great interviews all queued up, but I'm really hesitating to pull the trigger on launching my first episode. I keep thinking, I need more interviews and stockpiles so that I don't, burn out and stop. You know what I mean? I want to put a podcast episode out every week, and if I don't have, however many already ready to send out, then I'm going to, fade out and stop recording. But I think I'm really just holding myself back from releasing the first episode. So I'm just looking for, a checklist of everything that I need to do before I put my first episode of the podcast out so that when everything's checked off, I have no excuses and I just have to launch it. So awesome. I will definitely be continuing to listen to both podcasts, and thank you for everything you do.
Okay, here are a few things that were packed into that voice memo, which, by the way, thanks for recording that voice memo. That was awesome. Number 1, congratulations. You sound like you are off to a really good start. You have a clear vision for what you want to do and for your unique voice as a podcaster and your niche. And you sound like you are stockpiling interviews for upcoming episodes, which is actually a great technique. So there is an art to figuring out exactly how much content you need to have ready before you launch. My general standard rule of thumb is this: have 3 episodes completely ready to go and publish all 3 of those right at the beginning when you submit to Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, etc. Some coaches out there are going to be like, oh, you need to have as many episodes as you can right at the beginning so that you have a greater chance of getting into new and noteworthy. More people will download your episodes. That's hogwash, whatever. The real reason why you want to have a few episodes in your feed right away is because people are going to randomly stumble across your show, and they might actually listen to it. And if they listen to one episode, they're like, this show is awesome. I want to listen to what else she's got to say. And there's nothing else there. Wah-wah. They're disappointed. Or they think, I'm going to subscribe, but they only see one episode, so they don't really know if they should or need to subscribe, and they might skip it. Also, they might come across your show and your show looks interesting, but for whatever reason, the particular topic in the one episode that you've published doesn't really grab them. However, if you have 3 different episodes there to choose from, there might be one that does, even if the other 2 don't. I also recommend having 2 or 3 episodes, what I call on deck, meaning that they're pretty much done and they just haven't been published yet, so that you have your next week's episode and your next week's episode ready to go. Now, that is assuming that you have a weekly publishing schedule. So there's an inherent decision in here, which is, do you want to / need to have a weekly published show? And that is kind of like the standard that people think of when they think of a publishing schedule. When I launched my first show, The Creative Imposter, I fully expected to publish a weekly episode. Each episode was going to be an interview format and would run somewhere between 45 and 60 minutes because I just thought this is what you do. However, I quickly discovered that those interview format episodes take much longer to produce than I would have originally thought in order to have them be the quality of what I want to represent my show and my brand. And that because I do not make money off of that podcast, or at least did not in the beginning, and had to do other things to survive and to pay the bills, I could not spend all of my time making podcasts. So sad. And it was unrealistic of me to think that I was going to publish that much content of that quality on that weekly schedule. So I did two things. I decided to mix in some solo episodes that would be just me and that would be shorter because those are a lot faster for me to produce. And side note, those tend to be some of my most popular episodes, not necessarily in terms of the number of downloads, but definitely in terms of the listener feedback I get from subscribers and regular listeners. The other thing I did is told myself that I was going to try for weekly. However, I was going to cut myself some slack and just publish as often as I could, which the traditional podcast boss logic is to pick a schedule and a frequency and be consistent. That really is the best advice. But I knew for me and my personality and my schedule and the way my workflow fluctuates, there are some months when I can easily produce 4 episodes in a month. And there are some months, like when I'm teaching my high school program, where I just cannot possibly do that. And I didn't want to feel guilty or feel bad or make my podcast feel like a chore. And to be perfectly frank, if your listeners are anything like me, which they may or may not be, they may not even know what day of the week your show drops. They may not even really notice if you miss a week. So try to pick a schedule. It may be weekly. You could start off with every other week, especially if you know you're very busy. You could even start off with once a month, though I would say try for every other week to begin with, and then adjust from there. If you find that you have plenty of time, then sure, go weekly. If you find that you don't have as much time, drop it down to monthly. And if you find that every other week is just right for you, stick with it, Goldilocks. Whew. Podcast angel music. It must be time to tell you about one of my very special podcast angels. These are the companies, services, products, brands, and humans who make this podcast and the Creative Imposter podcast totally possible for your listening enjoyment. You know how I said that you could go to podcastnv.com, drop your email in a little box at the bottom of the page, and then have my super secret, special, amazing podcast launch checklist sent directly to you? Well, there is an amazing company that makes that whole thing possible. And that company is called ConvertKit because they are the best email service provider that I know of. And they're all good. But ConvertKit has been my favorite because I hate sending email. Like email newsletter, email marketing, all that stuff gives me the heebie-jeebies. I just don't love it. But ConvertKit makes it so easy for me to email you. And it makes it so easy for me to send you these lovely little bonus gifts when you do sign up to receive email from me, which, by the way, I still hate email marketing, and so therefore I promise you will not get spammed with an email message from me every single day and a lot of hypey offers. It's just not my style. I can't do it. However, you will get that checklist, and you will get notified when there are new episodes, and you will get notified when there are opportunities to get things, learn things, do things, participate in things, become a part of things. Don't you want to be included? I mean, you don't want FOMO, do you? ConvertKit. It's not free, but it's totally worth it. But what is free is your first month when you sign up through Podcast Envy. So pull up the show notes for this episode, follow the link, or head on over to podcastenvy.com and you will find it under my Podcast Angel resources. Once you give them some green, I'll get a little something back from ConvertKit for introducing you to their amazing service. How angelic. Okay, as for your real question, which is, am I holding myself back from launching / is there a checklist of everything I need to do to be ready to launch so that I can not keep making excuses for not doing it? Yeah, of course. Of course. I have a checklist that I normally reserve just for my private Podcast Envy launch clients who pay me for one-on-one coaching to cut their learning curve and their timeline down from what it would take to DIY absolutely everything, and to hold them accountable and to help see them through any bouts of imposter syndrome that may come up during the process. So that Podcast Envy launch checklist is normally for those clients. But since you asked, and since I'm feeling extremely generous, for a limited time, super limited, I am going to make that available to you if you head over to podcastenvy.com. Of course, you can link to it from the show notes and scroll down to the bottom of the page, and there you will find a little place to drop your email address. And when you do, you will get that checklist sent directly to you. So that is for a limited time. If you're listening to this pretty soon after it publishes, it will be there until I decide to offer something different based on another listener question. And in terms of holding yourself back from launching and actually how much content you need to have ready to go, I told you what the ideal was for me. 3 episodes published, 2 on deck. But really, even though that's my advice, and even though that's what I did with The Creative Imposter, with Podcast Envy, I did not follow my own advice. With this current show, you may have noticed if you've been listening from the beginning, which was only just a few episodes ago, I launched with 1 episode. And the reason why is because I had a few more recorded, but I just hadn't had time to edit and prep them. And I was leaving for PodFest, which is a Florida-based podcast conference. And I really wanted to have the show launched by the time I went to PodFest. And I was a little behind schedule, and my choices were don't launch at all because 3 episodes aren't ready and say coming soon, or publish 1 and just say it's launched, more soon. And so I made that executive choice to go ahead with the 1 single episode. Has that doomed Podcast Envy from the start to not be successful? No, absolutely not, because you're listening right now. So we're good. So let's recap. 1, weekly episodes? Sure, if you can do it. If not, then change your schedule. No big deal. Stockpiling? Yes, great idea. But don't get bogged down by thinking you need to have like 50 episodes already recorded before you can launch. One good piece of wisdom that I love is start before you're ready. Am I holding myself back from launching? Yeah, probably. There could be any number of reasons why you don't feel ready. Again, see above. Start before you're ready. And is there a checklist of everything I need to be ready to launch? Yes, you can get it from podcastenvy.com. Drop your email in the opt-in at the bottom of the page, and I will send it to you. Does that answer all of your questions? I am loving your Instagram feed, and I can't wait to hear your show. Please let me know when it's live. All right, Podcast Envy listeners, do you have a question for me about your show or about podcasting in general? I'd love to feature your question on a future episode. Here are a few ways that you can send it over to me. Number 1, visit podcastenvy.com, click the contact page, and you can either send it to me as an email with the email form there, or there's a little box underneath the email form for something called SpeakPipe, where you can press record, and you can actually record from your computer or your phone a 90-second or shorter message for me. And then I get to play it right here on the podcast. If that voicemail thing is not working, do not despair. You can also record a voice memo for me on your phone, which is what Anna Joy did, and then email me directly with that audio clip as an attachment at Andrea, Andrea, at thecreativeimposter.com. Please don't spam me, but do send me your questions with an audio attachment so that I can play it on the show. The other way is that you can join my private Facebook group, The Creative Imposter, and you can post in The Creative Imposter your questions. I have a couple Facebook group questions that I will be getting to soon, and that is a great way to get my attention. Don't forget to visit podcastenvy.com, drop your email, and get my very super special private secret checklist for everything that you need to get your show launched. And check out my Patreon so that you can become a podcast angel. And yes, I will say your name on this podcast if you do. That's at thecreativeimposter.com/support. Podcast Envy is produced by your podcast boss, Andrea Klunder. That's me. The Podcast Envy theme music is by Valentin Sosnitsky, courtesy of the Free Sound Project at freesound.org, and our podcast angel music is by Benjamin Mastropolito, also on freesound.org as Lemon Cream. All music is licensed under the Creative Commons. Our episodes are mixed by Edwin Ruiz, and hey, if you want your show to sound as good as ours, hire us. Put the magic audio mojo of the Creative Imposter Studios to work for you. Thanks so much for listening, and here's to making your podcast the envy of everyone else.